find such a love at our age. Whoever thought we could dance on a thrilling...
Welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words. I'm your co-host, Judy Alexander, and I'm here with my husband, Dr. Bruce Chalmer.
Hello, Judy. Hello, viewers and listeners. Judy, what's today's topic?
Staying married is the hardest part. An interview with Dr. Bonnie Comfort.
What a delightful interview we just had, and you guys will get to see it very shortly. And she's written a really neat book, which I did read, and as we talked about in the interview, and I highly recommend it. Staying Married is the Hardest Part, a memoir of passion, secrets, and sacrifice.
Yeah, so if you want to read a really honest, compelling memoir, we recommend this book.
Yes, absolutely. And it's really a lot about, she's very explicit in terms of the stuff that went on in her 30 plus year, what'd she say, 33-year marriage, I guess, until her husband died, sadly. But it's really, and she's really interesting in how she describes it. And speaking especially to women, for sharing her own experience in hopes that women will recognize the ways that y'all women, speaking to y'all women, can not have to acquiesce to things that are
right, and
outside
are sometimes
what you want to.
manipulated into situations that are very uncomfortable.
Yeah. And she's just a really good writer.
Yes.
And so it's very an engaging, very
and a
engaging
good interview
book.
subject too.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. So let's just briefly. I don't think we have to go into huge details. Let's just mention our books.
Okay. Well, since this one did come up during the interview, Betrayal and Forgiveness: How to Navigate the Turmoil and Learn to Trust Again, because that was a big topic.
That did come out. She wrote a lot about betrayal. So we've got that one. We've got a couple other ones. I've got a book called "It's Not About Communication." I've got another book called Reigniting the Spark. You've got a book which we should absolutely mention.
Okay. Well, yes, this is The Blue Tent: Erotic Tales from the Bible by Laria Zilber, and it's 10 short stories based on tales and characters from the Bible.
And it is very explicit and steamy and beautiful erotica.
Thank you.
So if you want to spice up your relationship or just have fun by yourself,
there you go.
Go for it.
Okay.
So let's go on to our interview, and we'll see you on the other side.
Our guest today is Dr. Bonnie Comfort. Dr. Comfort has been a practicing psychologist for 30 years. She has an MSW from the University of Manitoba and a PhD in psychology from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology, Los Angeles. Her novel, Denial, a psychological thriller from Simon & Schuster, was published in 8 countries and translated into 5 languages. As an expert on marital therapy, Dr. Comfort has been a guest on many podcasts about marriage. Her forthcoming book is Staying Married is the Hardest Part, a memoir of passion, secrets, and sacrifice. Bonnie, welcome to Couples Therapy in 7 Words.
Thank you so much. And I love the 7 words, I have to say.
Well, glad you like it. Yes, that's right. We organized the podcast around it. So we always like to start off with our guests just asking, how did you get into the work you do? Tell us something about your own journey.
Oh, well.
Of course, that could be your whole book, couldn't it? But,
well, yes.
Which I'm interrupting you even before you start. I highly recommend, by the way. I read your book and loved it. That's really one of the main reasons we invited you on, actually, because, your publicist said, send us your book, and I just absolutely loved it. So please go on.
Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate it. I have talked to some people who really haven't read it, and, just going by some notes. So it means a lot to me that you read it and that you loved it. That's great. How did I get into being a psychologist? I wanted to be a psychologist since I was 15 years old. I find nothing more fascinating than what goes on inside people. And my mother was very insightful. I was the youngest of 3 daughters and the last one at home. And I listened to her talking to my father a lot from the back seat of the car. And her observations after being at some social event were fascinating. So I felt like the connection of knowing what is going on inside of somebody was the most satisfying way to relate to people. And so long before I became a psychologist, I was fascinated by psychodynamics. I read a lot of, read a lot of material before then.
Mhm. So, of course, the book you wrote, well, actually, I'll just ask in general. I mean, how did you decide to write a book like that? And for the benefit of folks who haven't read your book yet, it's very, very personal, very revealing. You go quite deep and quite detailed. How did you decide to do that?
Well, after 33 years together with my husband, whom I adored and who adored me, he died too young for me. And I was really heartbroken over it. And I needed to write my grief. And that's how I started. I was writing, I had been writing other things before that. As you know, I was writing fiction, but this was different. I needed to write to process my grief and to talk about the difficult parts of my marriage that not very many people knew about. Particularly, I didn't want to talk about it with people who knew him. I wanted to protect him. And so I carried this unpleasant aspect of our relationship with me in a private way for many, many years. And I needed to write about that too. And because I needed to process my anger about it in addition to grief. And it was a very surprising experience to write about it and discover my own role in the problems that I never realized while he was still alive. And I was so sorry that I couldn't go back and say to him, "Oh my God, I really know what happened between us, and a lot of it's my fault."
Mm,
Um,
well,
but the one thing I want to say is that I was concerned about releasing this into the world and my former clients and patients thinking, "Oh my God, I had no idea what was going on with her. We're fine compared to that." But I thought it was important for people to know that therapists have their own struggles and everybody has complicated relationships and marriages that are not easy to deal with. And I had things I wanted to say, particularly about shame, sexual shame, and for women, particularly to be better at advocating for themselves, because even though all of the women's movement over the last 50 years has produced much more advocacy, self-advocacy from women, when it comes to their primary relationship, that training of being pleasing and being accommodating is still there.
mm,
If you had, well, here's like an unknowable. If you were to go to a marriage therapist, let's say with your husband, um, what would, if you were the therapist and a couple came to you with that, what do you think you would have talked about with them? What kind of, um, I don't want to say advice because I know generally couples therapists don't give advice. At
it
least
depends.
I
Well,
hear
it
from
depends
Bruce.
on the therapist. A lot of them do,
Yes, some do. But what are some of the things that you might have said to a couple that came to you with what you were presenting?
Well, first of all, I would have, what I always did was after seeing a couple for an initial interview, I did one individual interview with each partner because I
Mm,
wanted to get the personal history in detail and maybe something that they would even feel embarrassed to say to their partner. And so I would have taken a personal history of me, why I chose him, what was attractive about him, what my sexual history was that I brought into the relationship, and I would have asked him the same thing. And that would have given me a perspective to be able to talk with each of us about our conflicts. But that being said, my husband had a fetish. And after I went to see somebody on my own about this, a well-known psychiatrist in Los Angeles. She said to me, fetishes are extremely difficult to change. And I don't think that if you went to sex therapy, it would change that. So I felt very disappointed about it, but it sort of moved me toward resignation. Okay, we have to work around it. And in the beginning, but my relationship with Bob was not just about sexual conflict. It was a power differential. I was very drawn to him because he was brilliant, he was hilarious, and he was charismatic. And I had had a mother like that. And I was sort of programmed like a homing device to be incredibly attracted to a person like that, kind of live in their shadow, but also want to be validated and heard in a way that my mother did not. And so it's that old Harville Hendricks formula. You keep looking for the same thing and wanting a different outcome. And I remember early in my marriage with Bob, I said to him, if we discuss something and I make a valid point, you don't say, yes, good point, I see that, or I agree with it. And so I feel frustrated. What you do instead is change the subject. You're like a moving target, and I never get to to get acknowledgement from you. And to my shock, he said to me, "Huh, well," he said, "I'm an you're an okay, I see person, and I'm a yeah, but person. And
Mm.
you're going to have to fight for that. You're going to have to fight for me to acknowledge you." And I was disappointed by that, but it was very informative.
It's
It's
honest.
and honest, and I noted that in reading the book because of course I didn't know your husband, and for the benefit of again folks who haven't read your book yet because they should all get your book. Is it out yet? By the way, we're recording this on early May of 2025, just for folks who may be hearing this some
June
other.
17, next month, June 17, 2025, it'll be
Ah,
released.
very good. Yeah. So for the benefit of people who haven't read it, the he was a screenwriter, right? He
Yes.
did a lot of stuff in Hollywood and
Yeah.
associated things. And that level of it was fascinating the way you presented him. I really got the sense of someone who had a whole lot of self-understanding. And I also got the sense of, wow, couldn't have been easy. Of course, you're the one writing it, and you were from your own perspective. But that comment you just gave sort of fits in very well. I don't recall that particular thing was in the book. Maybe it
No,
was. I didn't think so.
no.
But it fits in with the picture that you portrayed in the book of someone who would say something like that. Well, you're going to have to fight for it. As opposed to he didn't deny it. He didn't argue with you.
Right.
Right.
He just said, yeah, yeah, I'm the kind of person, if you're going to get that, you're going to have to fight for it. Which that's
Right.
interesting. Of course, he also didn't say, well, gee, maybe I should look at that and try and pay attention to you more around things like that. He didn't do that either, did he?
No, no, but he was willing to hear whatever I had to say. He wasn't necessarily willing to change in response, but I did feel heard, and he was very insightful and insightful into himself as well as me, which was one of the glue uh, aspects of our relationship that and when I first said to him, I'm a psychologist, and he was a writer. He was a comedy writer, screenwriter. He said, "Oh, well, we're in the same business. You can't write well unless you really are interested in understanding people."
Oh
Sure.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. But actually, you were going to ask something.
Well, I was just going to ask you, how do you help couples navigate various incompatibilities, sexual and otherwise?
Well, in listening to you, Bruce, I realized I did very many of the same things because I think profound empathy is the magic bullet in marital conflict and repair.
Mm,
So I would listen to each side, but I would stop people from descending into ugliness and accusation and blame. I would just stop that and say, this is not helpful. I want you to assume, regardless of what the behavior is that you're experiencing from your partner, I want you to assume goodwill.
hmm.
That
Yeah.
and that's to your idea of having faith. Have faith in the person, that that person loves you, that they are struggling in their own way, that they are operating out of their own fears and embarrassments and defensiveness because they feel criticized, and to be able to put down your fists and be able to imagine what that partner is going through, and the pain that that person has is more helpful than let's negotiate a compromise here.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's so interesting because the whole story, I mean, the title of your book, Staying Married is the Hardest Part. I mean, I could see why you would say that. And it was so interesting because it seemed like it was a lot about recognizing, wow, there are some differences here that are serious. You weren't talking about sort of, oh, look, no two human beings are going to perfectly line up,
Right, right.
sexually or otherwise. You were talking about some differences that were really quite profound and could cause serious problems between the two of you. And you were determined, it seemed like, and apparently he was too, you were determined to find a way of
Mhm.
letting your love transcend it, which not everybody can do and probably not everybody should do, right? But there are
Yeah.
circumstances where I wouldn't even advise that. But does that sound right? I mean, there was, in terms of how you deal with incompatibility, part of it is how much will you have to want to stay together?
Which means how much glue there is in the
Hmm.
relationship, even from the beginning. How
Yeah.
attracted are you as to this person, not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically? How does it feel like this is my home? And I felt that way, that even though I had a terrible conflict with him over where to live, and ultimately I lost that fight. I did allow it because I felt that wherever he was my home, more important than our geographic location. But so
Mhm.
I do think there's powerful glue in the beginning that helps you override very difficult conflict. I think that's one thing. And he and I were 70% of the time, we just loved being together. There was
Mhm.
nobody else that I found more interesting to talk to than Bob ever. And that still remains true. He was so fascinating to talk to. So and he was cuddly, and we were physically close all the time. It was until he became too ill to sleep in the same bed with me. We were always cuddled up together at night. So those
Mhm.
things were very comforting, and they helped smooth over the conflicts that we had. Um, and uh, so I guess when I was doing couples therapy, I would look for those kind of deep bonds, look for the connection. And I remember one time I had a couple who were fighting in my office. I thought, oh my God, they are not even going to come back next time. They are done with each other. And I
Mhm.
thought about it a lot, and I thought, what could I have done differently? And to my shock, the next week they came back and they were laughing and they were close
Mhm.
again. And I thought, a couples therapist witnesses a couple in her or his office 1 hour a week.
Yep.
These people have thousands of hours of connection and understanding and shared jokes and history and children. We need to trust that there's more there than we can ever see.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's funny. I've often commented long ago. I mean, I've been doing this for 30 years now. Long ago, I stopped even trying to predict, even internally. You know, is this couple going to stay together or not? I realized my guesses were probably worse than chance. I was just going to guess wrong because just can't tell. There's so much else going on than happens to appear in any one conversation, and
Yeah.
that is an interesting thing. I was thinking with respect to the sexual incompatibility thing, I was thinking I would love to interview a person that we had on our podcast actually twice for two different reasons. Artemisia Divine.
Mhm.
I don't know if you've ever heard of her. I don't know how famous she is, but she's a former sex worker herself. She used to be a dominatrix. And she has developed what I think a really fascinating a way of understanding sexual fantasy
Hmm.
and in ways that invite couples to incorporate, even fantasies that are way outside anything anybody would actually want to enact, but to
Right, right.
incorporate some of those concepts in their understanding of each other into their sexual, contacts with each other.
Yeah,
And I was just curious, I wonder what she would make of, Bob's particular fetishes that he had and you're trying to cope with them.
yeah.
Um, if there might have been, it's just speculative. If there might have been some way the two of you could have come to an understanding where he could have had what he wanted, but not put you through what he put you through.
Well, we did have that in the earlier phase of our marriage
Ah,
because he said, I'm really turned on by beautiful lingerie and high heels. Will you do that? Well, I was
hmm.
a t-shirt and, cotton panty girl from from Walgreens. But I said, okay. And
Yeah.
I went and I got beautiful lingerie. And he was also a very talented photographer. And so that was kind of our foreplay. I would dress
Hmm.
up in beautiful lingerie. He would take pictures of me. And later, they were beautiful photographs. And he had photography exhibits and all this. And I felt loved and I felt beautiful. And he was so turned on that then we would have really good sex together.
Mm.
And that was okay until he was so miserable with disappointments in show business, so frustrated that as a sensitive guy as he was, he just shut down. And he shut down for months. And he would say, I'm sorry, I just can't get it up. I can't even go there. And I was young enough that I was very disappointed and upset about it, and I would nag him. And finally, we got into these discussions, these arguments, and he would say to me, "Look, I'm doing the best I can. I think you should just go out and get it somewhere else and not tell me about it, and don't do it with any of my friends."
Hmm.
And I, being the psychologist I was already, I said, "That is no solution to this problem. That is not going to be good for our marriage."
Mhm.
But after he said it enough times and after he was shut down for long enough, I thought, fine, fine, I'll go out and find it somewhere else. And I did it, and I didn't tell him, and I didn't do it with any of his friends. But that went on for 5 years. And at the end of that time, and I don't really know what triggered his question, one day he said to me, "So did you ever fool around?"
Mm.
And I was scared, but I finally told him the truth. And in that moment, something happened that I didn't realize until after his death, which was decades later. In that moment, he suddenly said, "This really turns me on. I'm so excited about this. I want to see you now with other men. I want to show you off to other men. Let's go out. Let's call one of those guys that you were with, see if he'll do a threesome." I said, "No, absolutely not. I'm not doing that." And that was a hard stop no. And so he sort of nagged me to do some modification that was kind of okay, which was, okay, let's go out in public, put on your underwear, and then we'll be in a restaurant, pick up your skirts so somebody can see your garters, or undo an extra button so they can see your cleavage. And and then he pushed me and pushed me and pushed me, and that's where we got into real marital trouble because it wasn't play anymore. It wasn't I felt pretty. I felt he was pushing me to do something I didn't want to do.
Mm.
And I said no a lot, and I said yes too much. And I was like a slot machine. You could keep, if you kept pulling the handle long enough, I'd
Yeah.
finally pay off. So
Intermittent reinforcement, as they say, right?
exactly.
That's what keeps people pulling the slots. Yes.
Exactly. I was stupid
Yeah.
in that way. So there was no extinction to the request. And that was the bad part. That went on for, I don't know what, 10 years. And it was very upsetting to me. And there were times when I did it when I didn't want to please him. And I felt ashamed of myself. I felt like I was letting myself down. I knew better. It was damaging to my self-esteem to say yes when I wanted to say no. And this huge epiphany I had after he died was that I didn't recognize in that moment when I told him about my affairs and he begged me to tell him and he promised me he wouldn't be angry. He said, "I told you to do it, so I can't be angry that you did it." He was angry. He was
Mm.
really
Yeah.
angry. And I
Yeah.
don't think he admitted to himself, and he for sure didn't admit it to me.
Yeah.
And I think in retrospect, I know it was reaction formation, which is not a common term people know. But
Mm.
rather than acknowledging the anger that he felt, he flipped it around. Oh, well, this is something I want. Let's do
Mm.
this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I wish that I
And
could.
interesting, what he wanted turned out to essentially humiliate you.
Yes,
And it's not like you were into humiliation, because I've met folks who are actually. It's not like that was your kink and his kink
right,
was being a, dominator. That wasn't it at all.
right.
Yeah. It was genuine anger, it seems like.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I had clues along the way that it was anger because sometimes when we fought, he'd say, "I don't know why you don't want to do this for me. It's so easy for you." And
Mm,
other times he'd say, well, you had your fun. Now now give me my fun.
mhm,
Those were angry things, and I didn't recognize it. I resented it. I got angry back, but
mm.
my insight monitor was low at that moment, and sadly so.
Well, you just wanted to appease him, it seems.
And I guess, I felt guilty about being
Of
unfaithful. It
course.
was, it
Mhm.
was not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And, I wasn't really that sexually responsive to any of those people. I was just, I don't know, I was kind of getting revenge with it, even though we didn't know about it. And I was getting affirmation of, still being desirable. So,
Mhm.
Yeah. It's interesting because all of that also speaks of that glue you had, because so many people telling anything like this story would be talking about, that's soon after that is when we divorced,
right. Sure.
and that is not what happened with the two of you. And you write about, I mean, I'll mention you do write about all that stuff you're just saying in the book, and it's
Mhm.
really very powerful to read about that.
And that and then that was one stream of our conflict. The other one, which was so difficult for me and him, but more for me, was that a few years after we married in Los Angeles, and I assume we wanted to live there for life, he announced he wanted to leave LA. He wanted to live in a small town. And I was shocked and terribly, terribly upset about it because not only did I love LA, not only did I choose it because I wanted to live there the rest of my life. Him asking me to leave was like unwinding the cure that I had given myself for my mother's pain. My mother
Mm,
had been raised in LA. And when she married my father, she moved with him to Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is not that pretty a place. And it's bitter cold in the winter.
mm,
And she was homesick her whole life for LA, and I saw it. She tried to make the best of it, but I promised myself I was never going to do that. I was never going to not be living in the place I loved. And so
mm,
here's my husband again repeating history saying, I want you to leave the place you love because I can't bear to be here anymore. And I have to choose. He said, I love you. I want you to come with me. But if you won't come with me, I gotta go anyway.
mm,
I don't know whether if I had dug my heels in long enough, he would have conceded because I did it for 2 years. I stayed there anyway, and we went back and forth, but I missed him. I missed him too much. So, but that was the
yeah,
other thing. It's not as interesting as the sexual conflict, but it was equally powerful and difficult for me.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for some people, that would be a deal breaker.
Yes, yes,
Yeah, it's up there with in the list, like whether or not to have kids is
yes,
sometimes a deal breaker, and then where to live is often a deal breaker. Yeah,
yes, yes.
Mm.
yeah.
And I mean, I have seen couples where, in an instance where a woman, they separated, and she said, I don't belong here. We live in Portland. I want to be on the East Coast. That's my home. That's where I am, and I just don't feel like I belong here. And he won't move, and I'm going to. So
Mhm.
it's a big deal.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it is hard. The my if listeners to us know my most recent book is about betrayal and forgiveness. Of course, your book is, I would say, full of that that both aspects of that, betrayal and forgiveness. Can you comment on that? I mean, how do you understand forgiveness, and do you feel like you forgave Bob, or do you still need to forgive Bob and forgive yourself, for the things you were saying that, well, it was partly your fault for acquiescing? I mean, how do you understand that?
Well, I understand it now as through the process of writing it out. I
Mm,
I wrote I probably wrote 2,500 pages, of which 300 are in the book.
mhm.
And a lot of it was
Thank you,
therapy.
editor. Yes. I'm not sure I would have read it if it was 2,500 pages, just saying. I mean, I enjoyed the 300, but
No, but a lot of it was processing that and
Sure.
coming in contact with feeling disappointed in myself for not being stronger in advocating for what mattered to me. And
Mm,
but there were turning points in my relationship with him, and one of them was triggered by him getting cancer when I was 45 and he was 51, which was tragic. Well, I guess he was 50. I was 40. He was 50. And in the face of a life-threatening illness, he went finally for real psychotherapy. And he
mm,
came out just in the beginning after the first 3 or 4 sessions, and he said he'd been crying in the session, and he said, I told him everything. I told him about my fetish. I told him about how I'd pressured you, and I feel so terrible about it now. I promise you I will never do that again. And I was ecstatic because that's all I wanted from him to say, I'm so sorry I did it. I see how it hurt you. I'm not going to do it anymore. And then, but oh my God, this is what I want, except you have to live. So, so we went,
for that. Yeah.
so we went through a whole year of horrible chemotherapy and radiation, and I knew in that instance, partly because he asked me to forgive him and said he wouldn't do this anymore, and he understood it, it hurt me. I knew that I would never leave him. He was
Mm,
so precious to me, and we went through it together, and I did everything for him, and he was profoundly grateful. And that was a big power shift between us, the
mhm,
biggest one, because he saw my strength, he saw how I looked after him, he saw my resilience and my confidence in him. And things were ever after that more respectful from him. Um, but he couldn't, when he went back to show business, when he recovered, when he became, everybody's darling in Hollywood and he was pitching and everybody was wanting him to write scripts, he was once again disappointed because he wrote these wonderful scripts and then they'd get this close to being made and there'd be some weird, capricious thing would happen and the deal would fall apart. And he got very depressed again. And then he just wanted me to do those sexual things again to cheer him up. He was
mhm,
more flexible about it, and I was less angry about it. But, there was a repeat.
mm,
And then once there were early signs, I don't know, 10 years after his cancer, he started developing early signs of dementia.
wow.
And that was incredibly sad. And it drew us closer because he relied on me more. I was there for him in every way, and I had to rescue us financially because he suddenly couldn't work. So I went back to work, and as I think happens in long-term marriages, the power imbalances shift sometimes
Mm,
dramatically because of children or because of hardship or accident or illness. And that happened with us. I began to feel more respect for myself, that I had gone back to work, that I was supporting us, that I was starting to look after him more. He needed more looking after. And he saw my strength as well. And so the last 10 years of our life together were deeply sweet and meaningful. And, after that certain point, he was not able to have sex with me the way he wanted to, but we were very physically affectionate with each other. And that was better than sex in a way,
mm,
And fortunately for me, he always knew who he was and he remained funny all the way to the last day.
wow.
It was remarkable. And that was his rare talent.
But how nice that after he went to therapy, he was able to say to you what he did and see what he did, the pain that he did put you through. So it was,
Oh,
I'm sure, important for you to get that from him.
yes, it was really important for me.
Mm.
But I still think I still had anger to process after he died. I still had
I'm
anger
sure.
to myself and shame about it. And I think it's only in talking about it and wanting to normalize that for other women and talk about it in my book and have other women read it, that even a therapist can go through this, and that it's important to broaden our scope of what is sexually acceptable. And I I know, and you know, that sexual fantasy and what excites comes very early in life,
Hmm.
very early. Before, it's not like you plan this. Gee, what am I going to be turned on by? These sexual fantasy and stories start in your head at 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. You don't really have control of it. They just kind of come unbidden. But those are the magic elements that remain what excites you the most throughout your whole life. And so, things have changed since I was younger, and um, sexuality is much more out in the open now. There's sex toy shops everywhere, and they're in good neighborhoods now, and lots of people go into them, and there's much more acceptance of that, which is helpful. But I think that women in particular struggle with body shame and with feeling like they're not performing. I think it's true for men too, but not as much, that we continue to see in the media sexual performance from women that has very little to do with what really is deeply sexually satisfying for them. I mean, the classic example, two people meet, they're hot for each other. In the next scene, he's slamming her up against a door, a window, a wall. She wraps her legs around his waist, and they go at it for 30 seconds. She comes, he comes, and it's good. And
Yeah, yeah.
I know, it's like, really? I don't
yeah,
think so.
really?
Uh, Yeah, and of course the problem of especially kids and both boys and girls actually
Yeah,
learning from porn, I say I put learning in quotes, what they
yeah,
learn from porn, of course, is utterly unrealistic
yes,
and the performances, and they come to believe that that's what the other people want. And then they're surprised when they don't. And yeah, that phenomenon of girls, turning into women and saying, "Oh, I'm not doing it right." And boys being just generally clueless about lots of stuff, I think. Even
yes,
even more
yes,
than girls are these days, apparently. Although we're all clueless in the ways we're clueless.
Yeah, well, that's
Yeah.
because they don't, when they teach sex ed, it's really how to prevent pregnancy and disease. It's not, you have the ability to say no. I mean, they do say that, but they don't say, well, you can touch each other without being sexual. You can touch yourselves and not have, penetrative sex. That's not what we're teaching our kids. So
I don't think
it's
they're
no wonder that they're not getting good information.
Yeah, I mean, what I hear from folks who talk about what their kids are getting,
Mm-hmm.
it's they're telling them about the mechanics.
Right.
They're even telling them, where tab A goes in slot B. I mean, they're telling them all that stuff. What they're not talking about is it's fun or it isn't fun, or how to make it fun, or how to figure out for yourself whether you think it's fun or not.
right.
That's the kind of stuff they're not talking about because anything that borders on the idea that would actually encourage teenagers to be sexual, they're already sexual, of course, but anything that would possibly smack of that, they will tend
Right.
to
They think
avoid.
just because you're going to talk about it, that means, well, I'm giving you carte blanche to
Yeah,
do it.
yeah.
That's not what you're
And it
saying.
it
But
just
so we
becomes,
don't talk about it
yeah.
and think, oh, well,
But
maybe they don't.
even when they're somewhat older, even when in late teens, early 20s, when it's okay to have, they're autonomous and it's okay to have sex with each other, I think a lot of young men feel they're supposed to know what to do without
Hmm.
asking.
Yeah.
And women are reluctant to say, I really don't like it when you touch me this way. I want you to do this, or this is what and so I think what's incredibly important is to have, and I see those as couples have been married for years,
Oh, I was going to say, I see that same thing with couples in their 40s, 50s, 60s and up. I mean, lots of couples simply don't know how to say things like that. They don't know how to talk to each other about what they like or don't like. Or if the woman, kind of stereotypically, if the woman says that to the guy gets offended, as
Right.
opposed to saying, "Wow, thank you for giving me the keys here."
Yeah.
Instead of being grateful, he's offended. It's like, don't tell me I'm a bad lover. It's like, well, dude,
Right.
maybe you ought to listen.
I, a number of years after Bob died, I briefly dated a man who I really liked a lot. Was very smart, and I got into bed with him, and he was uh, doing something with his hand that I didn't like, and I said, "Well, that's not how I like it. I like it like this." And he took his hand away and he said, "Don't tell. I don't want you to tell me what to do. I want to discover it for myself."
Yeah,
Right.
that's a problem right there.
Well,
Yeah.
yes, to feel insulted rather than this is a gift, the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah,
Yes.
Right?
exactly. It's
To
like,
discover this.
hey, yeah, exactly. And I might have pointed out to him as a guy myself, I might have said, when she tells you that, that is discovering. It's like, why don't you take that as part of your discovery process? Maybe
Right.
listen to her.
Yes. But
Yeah.
yes, those conversations are so difficult to have. I mean, I've had several women in my practice I've seen individually who have told me they have faked orgasm with their husband for 40 years.
Mm,
Never told them, never had that conversation. And so, in that way, I think women are still trying to protect a man's self-esteem by not telling him the truth. And it's a terrible disservice to both of them. So, both women and men need that kind of sex education. It's okay not to know. It's okay to listen carefully. Let your partner educate you about his or her body.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's the problem when if people are having sex and they're just doing what they're emulating what they see,
Yeah.
is that they're not taking the time to explore each other and find out what the other one likes, doesn't
Mm.
like, is willing to do, isn't willing to do.
Right.
Um, so that's, yeah, it's
Yeah.
a,
This, what occurs to me in you're saying that this reminds me of what David Schnarch used to say. Do you remember him?
I remember him.
Um,
Yes.
Yeah, and he died what right around the beginning of COVID, although I don't
Oh,
think it
did
was.
he? I didn't know he
Yeah,
died.
yeah, he died in his early 70s, which now that I'm in my mid 70s, I'm thinking, boy, that's young, Um, but in any case, he would give lectures, and he would say to folks, okay, at what age do you think both men and women reach their sexual peak? And the stereotypical answers would be, well, women in their like at 30 and men at 18 or something,
Right.
women older than men.
Right.
And he would say, nope, both men and women reach their sexual peak in their 60s and 70s. And of course,
Lovely.
yes, right. And people would look like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Well, he's obviously not talking about sexual gymnastics, as I like
Right.
to.
right,
He's not talking about hormones.
Right.
He's not talking about the sort of stuff that younger people have more of or more
Mhm.
ability to. He's talking about maturity and
Yes.
specifically talking about, my favorite thing, a lot of which I got from Schnarch, actually, the concept of tolerating the anxiety as a necessary part of intimacy. And the anxiety of being able to talk about stuff and not know and recognize that you don't know and listen to what the other person is saying, even if it's not what you thought, especially
Mhm.
if it's not what you thought, that's a function of maturity. And so it really takes older folks to be able to tolerate that. And that's what lets you get to levels of desire and levels of exploration and play and fulfillment and all that stuff that, young people, even with all of their physical prowess, aren't mature enough to be able to do
Yeah.
unless they're really unusual. So
Yeah.
I just love that concept that says, yeah, it takes maturity to be able to talk about this stuff. And I know that again with,
right. Because if you
yeah,
were a young woman and you said that to a man, what you said to that boyfriend, I really don't like that, that would probably have the effect of, well, I'm not going to say anything to my next partner if that's the way men are going to
Right.
act, right?
Right.
hmm
Yes.
So, it's, somebody who's mature will say, well, you know what? Either you don't do that or we can stop seeing each other or whatever it is. This is, you might want to explore, but don't explore that spot, honey.
Yeah. I really love that idea of tolerating anxiety and I don't remember Schnarch talking about that. So that's an interesting thing I will take away from this. But one of the things that I also think for women is having the courage to and to tolerate disappointing your partner, not in bed particularly,
Yep.
but being able to say, okay, I need to do this. I need to go and have a dinner with my girlfriend in the middle of the week. You're going to survive for a meal without me. Even though,
Somehow.
yeah, no, like, oh, I don't want, and then I do that and feel guilty, and learning to tolerate the guilt and the disappointment
Yeah.
allows you to advocate for what you need and go for it, because
Mhm.
otherwise you shrink yourself to accommodate too much your partner.
Yeah, I've talked about that for decades with folks in the very context of tolerating anxiety. I've often said one of the chief skills of relationship is the willingness to disappoint your partner. Not because you're a jerk and you like disappointing them, of course, but because you may need to do something important to you that will disappoint your partner. And the neat thing is, if you feel the power to do that, then you can do it nicely. And
Yes.
if you don't, then it's often nasty. Do you know what I mean? So if you're not feeling guilt about it, if you're just saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this, and I know you wish I weren't, but I'm going to," but
Hmm.
bummer for you, and I get that, and hey, I'll make it up to you, or something.
Yeah,
It's
right,
not about out of debt. It's just out of compassion.
right, right.
When people feel good about themselves, and it goes back to that concept of faith. When you have that essential faith in both parties' validity,
Hmm.
we know we're both valid people. We know we're not evil, we're not crazy, and we're not stupid. We're just people doing the best we can here. And so, yes, I'm going to disappoint you. And I feel bad about that you're going to be disappointed, but I don't feel bad about what I'm going to do because it's important to me.
Yeah.
So that willingness to do it, and then of course on the flip side, the willingness to receive that and be disappointed, but be gracious. And that's the other time I often bring this up, actually, is in the sexual context. It is absolutely inevitable, I claim. I shouldn't make absolute statements, but this one sounds pretty good. Absolutely inevitable that two human beings that are encountering each other long enough will encounter the moment, if in a sexual relationship, will encounter the moment where one person says, "Hey, wanna get it on sexually?" And the other person saying, "Nah, not going to happen."
Yeah,
That's inevitable to happen eventually.
absolutely.
How a couple handles that moment is both a reflection of how they're doing
Hmm.
and a causal factor in how they're going to go forward. Because when
Yes.
they handle that with grace, it actually is better than if it hadn't happened. Because if they handle it with grace, then they have the confidence of saying, "Oh, I can disappoint you and you're not going to be a jerk."
Hmm.
Or I could be disappointed and not be a jerk. Both of those things.
Yeah.
And and conversely, I mean, I've met numbers of couples over the years where they have told me, and couples have been married sometimes for decades,
Hmm.
and they've come into therapy and they've told me the the iconic story of when things went off the rails was, in one case, it was literally on their wedding night,
Oh my
and
God.
they'd been drinking, and they'd been, it's not like it was the first time ever having sex. They'd had sex before, but it was a wedding night, and she was just exhausted. They'd been up, like till 3 in the morning or something, and she just didn't want to have sex then, and he was a total asshole about it. And I met them 30 years later, and they were still having problems. And
Wow.
I'm not trying to say it was only that incident, it's what that
Yeah.
incident represented. But that's it. He recognized it. He was finally mature enough to realize, boy, I was being a jerk, wasn't I? And that was helpful in their moving along. But it is amazing how that willingness to disappoint and willingness to be disappointed with
Mm.
grace, it really, that's things will be fine if you can do that.
Well, and I think that your partner, even if your partner isn't happy to hear what you have to say, it earns their respect because
Yeah,
you are willing to be truthful. You're willing to advocate for what you need and
yeah.
hope that the person will accept it. And, and ultimately, your partners want you to be happy. They don't want you to become so controllable and self-sacrificing that
Oh
you're
yeah.
Hopefully.
Well,
not a
yeah, exactly.
vibrant other there. You're,
Yeah. No, and it's interesting. I love the paradox of it because again, using the situation of, let's be stereotypical. Let's say it's the guy who wants sex and the woman is saying no, although obviously it isn't always that way. But if it is, then the interesting thing is when she can say no with grace, she can enjoy the fact that he still desires her. In other words,
Yes.
she could say, "Well, I'm glad you're turned on by me. That's good." And
Yeah.
he can say, "Yeah, I am. That's really good." So you're saying no will disappoint me, but absolutely I want you to be happy, and I wouldn't want you to, have sex with me if it's not going to be good for you. So
Right.
yeah, so they're both showing love for each other, but the
Yes.
disappointment is part of the picture. It's like, well, you're disappointed because you want me. Well, that's not bad news for the marriage. That's good,
Mhm.
even though it's disappointment. So, when couples can do that, they'll probably be okay.
But to your point about maturity, or Schnarch's point, I think as we age, we tend to be more certain of who we are, a little more confident in it, and therefore
Yeah.
more able to tolerate disappointment or, not getting what we want and not take it so personally.
Yeah. Yeah. We develop perspective just
Yes.
with experience, and among the experiences that help you develop perspective, of course, are the real painful ones. The
Yeah.
betrayals and the disappointments and the broken hearts. Actually, they're painful, but you do learn from them. Now I'm channeling my late mother. May she rest in peace. It's good for your character. Yeah.
Who is the person you're channeling? I didn't.
My late mother.
Oh, I didn't
Yes.
hear that. Oh, okay.
Allah Shalom. May she rest in peace. In Yiddish. So, yes. So, how can people get hold of your book, and how can people, get in touch with you if they want to? Like, tell folks how to find your stuff.
Well, the easiest way is just go to bonniecomfort.com, and that's my website. It shows my book, how to buy it, which is everywhere. It's going to be released on June 17th. 17th. It's available for pre-order now uh,
Uh-huh.
on all the sales websites, Amazon, Simon and Schuster, who distributes it, and Barnes and Noble and Target, all of those places, you can order it. It will be released in paperback and Kindle, and hopefully the audiobook will be ready by June 17th. Keeping my fingers crossed on that. But the way to find me is bonniecomfort.com, and I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as Bonnie Comfort Author.
Great. Well, we will put your website in the show notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, it was a pleasure. It was really a pleasure. I enjoyed it very much, and thank you so much for reading my book all the way through and giving me that nice feedback. So,
Absolutely.
Thank you. Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Bonnie. I know we did.
Absolutely. We did indeed. Judy, how should people get in touch with us if they want to suggest someone else we should interview or even suggest themselves, perhaps?
Sure. You can go to our website, ctin7.com. That's CT as in couples therapy, in 7, the number 7.com.
That's right. And when they go to ctn7.com, they can suggest themselves or someone else or a topic. They can ask us a question. We
Yes,
sometimes do
yes.
that. They can sign up for my newsletter, which has now migrated. It's now on Substack. For those of you who are familiar with Substack, I have a Substack. I believe it's brucechalmer.substack.com. That's pretty straightforward. And so if you go there, you will find I'm posting more often than I used to do newsletters. And we've started doing some things we're calling short takes.
Yes.
We recorded one yesterday that I'm not sure I'm
Not
going
so
to put it
short.
on. That ended up being a 20-minute short take. When we say short takes, what we really mean
Like
is,
5,
5
7
minutes,
minutes,
7 minutes, something like that. So I'm posting a number of those, which you may find interesting and, give you kind of almost a little, Bruce Chalmer 101 course in terms of how I work. The stuff that we
Right.
base this podcast on and the stuff that I've written about, that kind of stuff. So I think that's what we need to cover at the moment.
I think it does.
And so until next time,
Remember, be kind
don't panic.
and have faith.